Judge Christopher Williams sat at his wooden bench in the small county courthouse. His gray hair was neatly combed and his reading glasses perched on his nose. Every Tuesday morning was traffic court day, and his courtroom was packed with people, waiting for their cases. Emily, his young clerk, placed a thick stack of files on his desk. "Busy morning, Your Honor," she said quietly. Judge Williams nodded and checked his watch. He wanted to finish these traffic cases before lunch. His mind was already thinking about the chicken sandwich waiting in his office drawer. "Let's start with case 4387, he announced. Margaret Johnson versus the state. A woman in her mid-30s stood up from the crowded benches. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small black handbag. Her dark skin glowed under the harsh courthouse lights. She walked to the front with steady steps, though her hands trembled slightly. "Your Honor," she began, speaking clearly, "I received a parking ticket last week, but I believe it was unfair. The sign was hidden behind tree branches. I took these photos to prove it." She reached into her handbag and pulled out several printed photographs. The pictures showed a parking sign covered by large leafy branches. Judge Williams barely glanced at the photos. He picked up the police report from his desk instead. "It says here you parked in a no parking zone. Officer Smith is very reliable. The fine is $150. But sir, if you would just look at my photos—" "Ms. Johnson," he interrupted, "I don't need to examine photographs. The officer did his job correctly. Please pay the fine at the clerk's desk." Margaret's face fell, but she kept her composure. She gathered her photos with shaking hands. As she turned to leave, she saw several other people in the courtroom watching her. They looked worried, too. There was Thomas, a young man in his 20s, wearing faded jeans and a worried expression. He was clutching papers about his jaywalking ticket. Next to him sat elderly Mrs. Wilson, counting pound coins in her purse. She had received a ticket for an expired parking meter while she was inside buying her medicine. In the back row, James Miller shifted nervously. He was a construction worker who had gotten a speeding ticket driving to his sick mother's house. His calloused hands gripped the edges of his seat. Margaret walked slowly to the clerk's desk. As she paid her fine, she heard Judge Williams call the next case. Thomas Wright versus the state. The young man stood up, his face pale. "Your Honor, I crossed the street because the crosswalk light wasn't working properly. I have my phone video here showing. Jaywalking is jaywalking, Mr. Wright. The fine is $100. But I'm saving for university. This money was for my textbooks. Not my concern. Next case." Thomas sat down heavily, his dreams of new textbooks fading. Mrs. Wilson patted his arm gently, understanding his disappointment. Judge Williams continued through the morning, each case taking less than 5 minutes. Every person tried to explain their situation. Every person was cut off. Every person was fined without proper consideration. Sarah, a single mother, tried to explain that her speedometer was broken. "I was driving to pick up my children from school. I had $200, Judge Williams said, signing the paperwork without looking up. Peter, an immigrant from Poland, struggled with English. "Please, sir, I no understand sign. My English not good." Ignorance of the law is no excuse, $150. By noon, Judge Williams had processed 30 cases. His efficient system meant he could finish before lunch, just as he planned. He gathered his files and stood up. "Court is adjourned until next week," he announced. As the courtroom emptied, Margaret Johnson stood outside on the courthouse steps. The autumn wind blew through her hair as she watched others leave the building. Each person looked defeated, carrying the weight of unexpected fines. Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Helen? It's Margaret. You were right. Something needs to change. These fines are hurting our community." Inside the courthouse, Judge Williams ate his chicken sandwich at his desk. He looked at his calendar, planning his afternoon golf game. He didn't notice Emily examining the court records with concern. She had been watching the proceedings all morning, and something didn't feel right about the rushed justice she was witnessing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse lawn. Margaret still stood outside, making more phone calls. Other people who had been fined were gathering around her. They began sharing their stories, finding comfort in their shared experiences. Thomas approached Margaret. "Excuse me, Ms. Johnson. I heard you tried to show evidence too. They don't really listen to us, do they?" "No, Thomas, they don't, but maybe it's time they did." As Margaret spoke these words, a spark of hope began to grow. Change was coming to the small county courthouse, though Judge Williams didn't know, not yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret Johnson became a familiar face in the small town of Bridgewater. Every day after work, she visited different neighborhoods, knocking on doors and meeting with people who had faced Judge Williams in traffic court. Mrs. Wilson invited her in for tea one afternoon. The elderly woman's small living room was filled, with family photos and knitted blankets. "I couldn't buy my heart medicine this month," Mrs. Wilson explained, stirring her tea slowly. "That parking ticket took all my extra money." Margaret wrote down Mrs. Wilson's story in her notebook. It was getting thick with similar tales. She had collected 43 stories from people who felt treated unfairly in court. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Williams continued his quick judgments. Every case was rushed, every fine was standard. He didn't notice the change happening in the community outside. On Thursday morning, Margaret made an appointment to speak with Helen Carter, the town's newspaper editor. Helen's office was cluttered with papers and old coffee cups. She listened carefully as Margaret shared the stories she had gathered. "This is serious, Margaret," Helen said, adjusting her glasses. "Our readers need to know about this. People deserve fair treatment in court." The following Monday, the Bridgewater Gazette published a front-page story. Local citizens question traffic court procedures. The article included interviews with several people who had been fined without proper hearings. Judge Williams arrived at the courthouse that morning to find something unusual. News cameras were set up outside. Reporters were interviewing people on the courthouse steps. His heart began to race. Emily met him at the door, looking worried. "Judge Williams, the local TV station wants to interview you about the traffic court article." "I don't have time for this nonsense," he grumbled, pushing past her. Inside his courtroom, he found another surprise. Margaret Johnson was there again, but this time she wore a professional gray suit. She sat at a table with an older man in an expensive suit. Several familiar faces filled the gallery. Emily handed him the morning's docket. At the top was written, "Margaret Johnson versus Judge Christopher Williams. Formal complaint." Judge Williams felt his hands go cold. For the first time in his 15 years on the bench, he felt nervous. The older man stood up. "Your Honor, I'm Barrister Richard Thompson, representing Ms. Johnson and 46 other citizens. We're filing a formal complaint about court procedures in traffic cases." Margaret stood next to him. "We're asking for a review of recent traffic court decisions. Many citizens believe they weren't given fair hearings." Judge Williams adjusted his glasses. He noticed Robert Palmer, a senior judge from the Bar Council, sitting in the back row. Palmer was there to observe the proceedings. Nothing could be rushed now. "Present your evidence," Judge Williams said, trying to sound calm. Margaret opened a thick folder. "We have statements from 92 citizens who appeared in this court during the past 3 months. The average case lasted 4 minutes. Only 12% of presented evidence was reviewed. 37 people were fined without being allowed to explain their circumstances." She handed him photographs, witness statements, and even some people's medical records. "Mr. Johnson here was fined for running a red light while driving his dying mother to the hospital. Mrs. Davies received a ticket while helping at a car accident. Young William there was fined for parking in front of his child's school during a medical emergency." As Margaret spoke, Judge Williams began reading the documents. For the first time, he saw the real stories behind the case numbers. These weren't just traffic violations, they were people's lives. Mrs. Wilson stood up from the gallery. "Judge Williams, you fined me $200 for an expired meter. I was inside the pharmacy getting my heart medicine. I'm 78 years old and live on a pension." Thomas Wright also stood. "You fined me $100 for jaywalking because I couldn't pay for university. I haven't bought new shoes this winter because of that fine." One by one, people shared their stories. Judge Williams had never seen their faces so clearly before. He had never heard their voices. Robert Palmer took notes quietly. The courtroom was silent except for the citizens' voices. Emily watched her boss's face change as he listened. She saw understanding dawn in his eyes. When the hearing ended, Judge Williams sat alone in his chambers. He spread the complaint documents across his desk. The evidence was overwhelming. He had been so focused on speed that he had forgotten about justice. Outside, the community was changing too. People who had been strangers were talking to each other. They shared stories over garden fences and in the local cafe. The newspaper article had sparked something in Bridgewater, a sense of unity and purpose. Margaret Johnson met with supporters at the community center that evening. "We can make this right," she told them. "Change is possible when we work together." Truth was spreading through the town like ripples in a pond. Judge Williams now faced a choice that would determine not only his future, but the future of justice in Bridgewater. The next morning, Judge Williams arrived early at the courthouse. He hadn't slept well. The stack of complaint documents sat unopened in his briefcase. He had been too ashamed to read them at home. Now, in the quiet of his office before dawn, he spread them across his desk. The first document was Thomas Wright's official statement. "I crossed at the broken crosswalk because the light wasn't working. I showed my phone video proving this. Judge Williams fined me without watching it. That $100 was for my engineering textbooks. Now I have to work extra hours instead of studying. Judge." Williams remembered Thomas, the young man with the phone. He had waved it away impatiently. Now he saw the photo attached to the statement, a broken traffic light hanging at an odd angle. The next statement came from James Miller, the construction worker. "My mother called saying her oxygen tank was failing. I drove 5 miles over the speed limit to reach her. Judge Williams said emergencies don't matter. My mother couldn't breathe properly for 2 hours because I had to turn back home to get more money for the fine." Judge Williams felt his stomach turn. He turned to another statement Mrs. Wilson had written in careful, shaky handwriting. "I was inside getting my heart medicine when my parking meter expired by 5 minutes. The $200 fine is more than my weekly pension. I chose between medicine and food for 2 weeks." He kept reading. Sarah, the single mother. "My car's speedometer was broken. I couldn't afford repairs and speeding tickets. I had to ask my children's school for help with lunch money. Peter, from Poland. I speak little English." The no parking sign used words I didn't know. Judge Williams wouldn't wait for translator. "I lost my cleaning job because I couldn't pay the fine." Story after story revealed a pattern. People with real problems dismissed in minutes. Evidence ignored. Explanations cut short. Every quick judgment had created hardship. At 8:30 a.m., Emily knocked on his door. "Judge Williams, Mr. Palmer from the Bar Council is here." Robert Palmer entered, looking serious. He carried a leather folder and sat across from Judge Williams. "Christopher, I completed my review. Your courtroom efficiency scores were excellent, but your justice scores, they're concerning." Judge Williams nodded slowly. "What happens now? You have 2 options," Palmer explained. "The Bar Council can order mandatory retraining and a period of supervision, or you can voluntarily admit the need for court reform and work with the community to fix these problems. The second option, Judge," Williams said without hesitation, "I want to make this right." Palmer seemed relieved. "Good. Ms. Johnson has proposed a community meeting this Saturday. The townspeople want to discuss changes to court procedures." That Saturday, the community center was packed. Judge Williams sat at the front, not in his usual position of authority, but as someone there to listen. Margaret Johnson introduced each speaker. Thomas Wright spoke first. "We need time to present evidence. 5 or 10 minutes per case isn't enough for justice." Mrs. Wilson added, "Some of us need help understanding legal terms. The court should provide clearer explanations." Sarah requested, "Emergency situations should be considered. Sometimes people break rules for good reasons." Peter's translator helped him suggest translation services for English learners would help prevent misunderstandings. Judge Williams took notes carefully. Then he spoke. "I apologize to everyone I've treated unfairly. I forgot that my job isn't just to enforce laws. It's to ensure justice. Starting Monday, I'll implement these changes." He outlined his plan. Minimum 15 minutes per case, proper evidence review, consideration of circumstances, available translators, and payment plans for those who couldn't afford fines. But the biggest change was yet to come. "I'll also start a community advisory board," he announced. "Citizens will help review court policies to ensure fairness." Margaret Johnson stood up. "Judge Williams, we appreciate your willingness to change. Who would you like on this advisory board?" He looked around the room. "I'd like Mrs. Wilson to represent senior citizens. Thomas Wright can represent students. Sarah Miller for working parents. Peter Kowalski for immigrant voices. James Brown for working class perspectives. And I'd like you, Ms. Johnson, to chair the board." The room filled with murmurs of hope. These weren't just random selections. They were people whose voices had been ignored for too long. Emily, watching from the side, smiled for the first time in months. She had witnessed the harm caused by rushed justice. Now she was seeing something rare, a powerful person admitting mistakes and choosing to change. Over the following week, Judge Williams visited each person he had wrongly fined. He apologized personally and arranged refunds for those in financial hardship. He drove to Mrs. Wilson's house where she offered him tea but no anger. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Judge," she said kindly. "Even judges." At the nursing home, James Miller's mother gripped his hand. "Thank you for caring now. It's not too late to do better." The town was healing, but the real test would come. Monday morning, when court resumed with new procedures. Monday morning arrived with rare sunshine in Bridgewater. Judge Williams entered his courtroom to find it transformed. Emily had placed water glasses at the witness stand. Chairs were arranged to make people feel more comfortable. A sign language interpreter sat ready. Translation headphones were available. At the front desk, the community advisory board members sat in the front row. Margaret Johnson nodded to Emily as she passed. Something felt different. The air seemed lighter somehow. The first case was called Rebecca Turner for running a red light. Rebecca stood nervously at the witness table. She was a young woman wearing hospital scrubs, clearly just off a night shift. Her hands fidgeted with her purse strap. "Ms. Turner," Judge Williams began gently, "please tell me what happened." "Your Honor, I know I ran the red light. But my daughter called from the hospital. She's 7 and has asthma. Her oxygen levels were dropping dangerously low." Rebecca's voice cracked. "I was rushing there." She presented her daughter's medical report and photos of the girl in an oxygen mask. Emily handed the documents to Judge Williams. He studied them carefully. "Did you reach the hospital in time?" he asked. "Yes, sir. She's doing better now, thank you for asking." Judge Williams looked at the medical records again. This case would have taken 3 minutes under his old system. Today, he had already spent 10 minutes listening and reviewing. "Ms. Turner, you did break the law, but you did so to help your child in a genuine emergency. I'm reducing the fine to $25 as a warning, not a punishment. Please drive safely, even in emergencies." Rebecca's eyes widened with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." The second case involved David Chen, charged with illegal parking. "I parked in the disabled zone for 5 minutes," David admitted. "I was helping an elderly man change his tire in the rain. His own car was blocking traffic. I have photos from other drivers as proof." He showed pictures taken by passing motorists. They showed David helping an old man in the rain, cars waiting patiently. "Mr. Chen, you showed good citizenship by helping someone in need." "Case dismissed," Judge Williams ruled. The third case brought young Michael Thompson before the bench. He looked barely out of high school. "I'm here for texting while driving," Michael said quietly. The officer was right. I was checking my interview confirmation email. I have my first job interview tomorrow. Judge Williams studied the boy's face. "Michael, do you understand why texting while driving is dangerous?" "Yes, sir. It was stupid of me. I was just nervous about the interview." "What job are you interviewing for?" "Junior clerk at Henderson's Accounting. It's my first real job opportunity." Judge Williams thought for a moment. He remembered the old system, quick fine, next case. Now he was considering the whole person. "Michael, the law exists to keep everyone safe. I want you to understand that no email is worth risking lives. The fine is $50, but I'll suspend it on one condition. Come back in 2 weeks and tell us if you got the job. If you did, you'll pay nothing. If not, you'll still pay nothing. But you must volunteer for 2 hours at the safe driving program. Michael's face lit up. Thank you, Your Honor. I promise I won't text and drive again. As morning progressed, each case received proper attention. An elderly man who forgot to renew his license received help from Emily to complete the paperwork in court. A woman whose child removed her parking permit was given a warning instead of a fine. The gallery watched in amazement. This wasn't the traffic court they knew. People weren't being rushed through like a factory production line. They were being treated as human beings. During lunch break, Judge Williams ate his sandwich in the courtroom instead of hiding in his office. Mrs. Wilson brought homemade cake to share with the advisory board. This is how justice should feel, she said, cutting slices for everyone. Thomas Wright looked around the room. It's like we matter now. Our stories matter. After lunch, more cases were heard with the same care. By day's end, Judge Williams had heard 15 cases instead of his usual 30. But those 15 people left the courtroom feeling heard and treated fairly. Emily compiled the day's statistics. Average case time, 12 minutes. Evidence reviewed, 100%. Fines reduced or suspended, 40%. Citizen satisfaction, visible on their faces. That evening, as the courthouse emptied, Margaret Johnson approached the bench. Thank you for listening today, Judge Williams. No, thank you, he replied. You helped me remember what this job is really about. Outside, the town was buzzing with excitement. Word spread quickly about the new court procedures. People who had feared traffic court now felt hope for fair treatment. The change had begun, and it was spreading throughout Bridgewater like morning sunshine, melting away the darkness of old fears. 6 months later, the Bridgewater courthouse had transformed completely. Every Tuesday morning, people still filled the courtroom, but now they sat with hopeful faces instead of worried ones. The advisory board met monthly, and their suggestions had led to many positive changes. Emily had become the courthouse's unofficial welcome guide. She greeted everyone with warm smiles and helped them understand the process. Take your time, she would say. Judge Williams will listen to your whole story. On this particular Tuesday, Michael Thompson returned to court. He had visited twice. Since his case was decided, he wore a neat suit and carried himself with confidence. Your Honor, Michael began, I promise to update you about my job interview. Judge Williams smiled. Please tell us what happened. I got the job at Henderson's Accounting. I've been working there for 4 months now. They even promoted me to junior analyst. Michael's excitement was contagious. Mrs. Wilson clapped from the front row. She had become a regular visitor, often bringing cookies for the court staff. The community had grown closer through these changes. And about my driving record, sir. I haven't touched my phone while driving since that day. I bought a hands-free device instead. Judge Williams looked proud. Michael, you've proven that a second chance can lead to positive change. Your case is officially closed with commendation. After Michael sat down, Emily called the next case. Sarah Miller regarding parking violation appeal. Sarah approached the bench looking much happier than her last appearance. Your Honor, I fixed my car's speedometer. Here's the repair shop receipt. I wanted to show you that I addressed the problem. Ms. Miller, this shows responsibility. How are your children doing? Much better. With the payment plan you arranged, I could afford repairs and still buy groceries. My kids thank you. Judge Williams had implemented payment plans for those struggling financially. The community fund, started by Margaret Johnson, helped some pay their fines through community service instead of money. Throughout the morning, familiar faces returned to court. Peter brought a translator, even though his English had improved. I volunteer at driving school now, he said proudly. I teach new immigrants about traffic signs. Mrs. Wilson's heart medicine was now affordable. She led a seniors group that attended court sessions to support others facing fines. At noon, the courthouse cafeteria buzzed with conversation. Judge Williams sat with the advisory board, discussing new ideas. They had proposed creating a court garden where people could volunteer hours instead of paying fines. The goal is restoration, not just punishment, Margaret explained. When people contribute to the community, everyone benefits. Robert Palmer from the Bar Council arrived for his quarterly review. He observed several cases, taking notes. Afterward, he spoke with Judge Williams. "Christopher, the change here is remarkable. You've reduced complaints by 90%. More importantly, court cases are resolved more fairly. It's not just me," Judge Williams said. "The whole community made this happen." Palmer smiled. "The Bar Council wants to use Bridgewater as a model for court reform. Would you be willing to train other judges?" Before Judge Williams could answer, Thomas Wright approached their table. "Judge Williams, I graduated top of my engineering class. I got a full scholarship for postgraduate studies. That day you listened to my story about the textbook money. That was my turning point." As the afternoon continued, the courtroom saw a mix of old and new faces. The local newspaper editor, Helen Carter, visited to write a follow-up story. Bridgewater Court shows how justice can heal. At day's end, Judge Williams walked through the courthouse garden. People were planting flowers as part of their community service. Children played nearby while their parents worked in the garden. George, the cafe owner, approached him. "Judge, I've known you for 20 years. I never thought I'd say this, but you've become someone people admire instead of fear." Judge Williams reflected on how much had changed. His new approach took more time, but it also brought more justice. Cases that once took 3 minutes now took 15, but those extra minutes meant understanding, compassion, and real solutions. As evening approached, Emily locked the courthouse doors. "See you tomorrow, Judge Williams." "See you tomorrow, Emily. And thank you for supporting me through this change." Walking home, Judge Williams passed familiar streets. Children waved from their bicycles. Shopkeepers nodded respectfully. The community had healed through justice treated as healing, not punishment. At home, he opened his journal. He wrote, "6 months ago, I was an efficient judge but a poor servant of justice. Today, I learned that when we listen with our hearts and judge with wisdom, we build communities instead of breaking spirits." Outside his window, Bridgewater glowed in the sunset. The small town had become a beacon of how one person's courage to speak up and another's willingness to change could transform an entire system. Justice now wore a human face, and the community was stronger for it. The story of Bridgewater Courthouse would spread beyond the town limits, inspiring other communities to demand and create fair justice systems. It proved that when people work together with open hearts, even the most stubborn systems can change for the better.